Hello everyone and welcome back to a new video on my channel. In this video I would like to use two astrophotography setups for astrophotography tonight. So in this video I would like to compare a $250 lens compared to a $1,200 astrophotography telescope. Because beginners and other astrophotographers always ask me, do I really have to spend a lot of money on a lens or on a telescope in order to be able to capture amazing images in deep sky astrophotography? And therefore I would like to compare these two astrophotography setups side by side, but the focus will be on this lens and this telescope. But before starting, I would like to mention that this video is not sponsored and I'm not being paid for it, and all products shown in this video were purchased by myself. But now I would like to start by introducing the two different astrophotography setups. But first of all, I would like to talk about the lens and the telescope I would like to compare in this video. So the lens I would like to use is a 75 to 300mm lens. So it's a very affordable lens. That's why I always recommend for beginners to buy this lens, because it's not heavy, it's affordable, and you can capture amazing images with this lens in deep sky astrophotography when stopping it a bit down. But you can as well use this lens wide open, but then the stars are not that good, therefore I recommend to stop down the lens a bit. And the telescope I would like to use is on this side is the Askar SQA55, which is a telescope that is designed for deep sky astrophotography. So these are the two components I would like to compare in this video. And I really hope that I can answer the question of whether you really have to spend a lot of money on expensive equipment. But to be short, it's not necessary. So you can capture amazing images in astrophotography with affordable equipment. In my opinion, the exposure time is the more important part. So when having a very short exposure time, you will not be able to capture amazing images even using a very expensive setup. But now, let's get started by introducing both astrophotography setups. So in this case, I would like to use the iOptron SkyGuider Pro, and I've attached a counterweight to this setup as well in order to give it a bit more stability. And the camera I would like to use is the Canon EOS 2000D. At the front, I've attached the 75 to 300mm lens, which will be the lens I'll be using for tonight. So I've been using this lens over the last few years, and I've captured so many amazing images with this lens. So I definitely think that this lens is quite good for astrophotography, but let's see how good it is compared to this $1,200 astrophotography telescope. Later I would like to attach a dew heater to this lens as well, and a remote shutter release cable, which helps me to capture multiple images tonight. And this is actually this entire deep sky astrophotography setup. On this side we do have the telescope that costs around $1,200, so just this telescope. So the basis of this mount will be the SQA55 Pro go-to mount. So it's a bigger mount compared to the iOptron SkyGuider Pro, but that's definitely necessary because this telescope is a bit more heavier. So on the top I've attached the telescope, which is the Askar SQA55, as I have already mentioned. At the front I've attached the CWO ASI Air Pro, which is an astro computer that allows me to control the entire deep sky astrophotography setup. On the top I've attached a guiding system, which will help me to achieve better stars in the end, but I try to use the same exposure time for both images, for both setups, in order to be able to compare both deep sky astrophotography setups. But just to introduce the entire setup to you, I've attached a 60mm guide scope, and the camera at the back is the CWO ASI 120mm mini mono guiding camera. At the back I've attached a DSLR camera. It's the Canon EOS 6D, so it's a full frame camera, which is quite good because this telescope is suitable for full frame cameras. As I have already mentioned, this telescope has a focal length of 264mm, which is quite nice for wide field astrophotography. So here at the front I can select the aperture of this telescope between f4.8 all the way up to f22, and I'd like to use the exact same focal ratio for both setups, so for the lens and for the telescope, in order to be able to compare both images. So just as an example, if you're using a lens with f2.8 and you capture the exact same object with the telescope with f5.0, for example, you will see more structures when using a lens with f2.8, for example. But I like to use the same for both setups later on. So for tonight's astrophotography session, I would like to use f4.5 with this lens, I guess, and with this telescope f4.8, which is quite nice because I can simply compare both astrophotography setups. So this is actually the entire deep sky astrophotography setup. So now we have to wait until it's dark enough, and then I'm planning to capture images all night long with both astrophotography setups. So this is actually everything I've planned to mention so far about both astrophotography setups. So now we have to wait until it's dark enough, and then I plan to do the pole alignment process on both setups, and then I would like to start by capturing the images of the deep sky object. Last night I was finally able to capture the images for this video. So last night the conditions were not perfect, but still I managed to capture enough data in order to be able to share two images with you now. Before talking about the two images I've captured, I have to mention something about the equipment I've used. So I made a few changes. So for sure I've used the exact same lens and the exact same telescope because the video was about that, but I've published multiple videos so far, so comparison videos on my channel, and people always said it's important to use the exact same mount for both images, and it's important to use the exact same guiding system and the exact same camera for these tests. Therefore, I decided to change the mount in this case. So in this case, I've now decided to use the iOptron SkyGuider Pro for both images. So first of all, I used the 75 to 300mm lens in combination with the iOptron SkyGuider Pro, and I took images for around 1 hour. Furthermore, I made the decision to use the exact same camera for both tests, so for both images, in order to be able to compare both images. So in this case, I decided to use the Canon EOS 2000D for both images. I just wanted to mention that. So right at the back, you can already see the first image I've captured, so the final stacked image. For this test, I decided to go for the Pleiades star cluster. That's because it's a very bright star cluster, and last night it was cloudy almost all time, which means I was not able to collect a very long exposure time. But still, I managed to capture enough exposure time for both images in order to be able to share a few results with you in this video. Just wanted to mention that. So I've collected 1 hour for each single image, which is basically the maximum exposure time I was able to capture last night. So in total, I collected 4 hours of total exposure time, but I had to delete a lot of images because it was quite cloudy, which means I do have 1 hour of total exposure time for each single image right now. But now let's start with the first image. So I captured this image with the 75 to 300mm lens in combination with the Canon EOS 2000D mounted on the iOptron SkyGuider Pro. I've used a single exposure time of 1 minute for each single image in order to be able to compare both images. So for sure, in this case, noise is definitely quite noticeable because the total exposure time is relatively short. So when zooming in, you can see that the stars are relatively round, which is definitely quite good. And when further zooming in, you can see that there's a bit of chromatic aberration. Chromatic aberration is something that you will have with a lot of lenses out there, especially with these cheaper ones. But when using this lens, for example, it's important to stop down the lens a bit. Therefore, I decided to use a focal length of 75mm, which allows me to use f4.0, and then I stop down the lens to f5.0, I guess, in order to have the exact same focal ratio as the big telescope. So I've captured this image with the camera, but still, so I've stopped down the lens, but still chromatic aberration is still quite noticeable, but it's definitely, but still there are a few lenses out there that do not perform that good. So it's definitely important for me to mention that. When zooming into the outer regions of this image, you can definitely see that the stars are no longer round. So this is already a cropped image, so definitely when using this lens wide open, the stars will not be that sharp and not that round in the corners. So it's a cropped image, but still, as you can see, these stars are no longer round, so they look a bit like star trails. So this is the image I've captured with the 75 to 300mm lens. Now let's go over to the image I've captured with the Askar SQA55 telescope. So now you can see the image I've captured with the Askar SQA55 telescope in combination with the Canon EOS 2000D mounted on the iOptron SkyGuider Pro. So in this case, I've collected nearly the exact same total exposure time, and in this case, I once again used a single exposure time of 1 minute. So in this image, definitely more structures are visible. When zooming in, you can definitely see that we do not have chromatic aberration in this image. So these stars do look perfectly round and perfectly sharp, and they look very good. There is no chromatic aberration. Still, I think that the telescope was not 100% in focus because these stars are relatively big, so usually these stars are a bit smaller when using it for astrophotography, so I am not sure whether the telescope was really perfect in focus. But still, you can already see a few structures in this image, so the total exposure time in this case is 1 hour. When zooming into the outwards regions of this image, you can once again see that these stars are perfectly round, so they are very round, no star trails, definitely very good. So this image is not cropped, but still these stars still look very good. I've even used this telescope in combination with a full-frame camera, and even in combination with a full-frame camera, this telescope performs very good. So when comparing both images, you can definitely see that the better telescope definitely performs better for astrophotography. For sure, it's more expensive, but in this video, I just wanted to test how much of a difference there actually is between using a very cheap lens for astrophotography and a very expensive telescope for astrophotography. And as you can see, there is definitely a difference between both, so between the lens and the telescope. If you have any further questions about this test or about the equipment I've used, definitely feel free to ask me down below in the comments, and I will definitely help you. If you would like to further support me, you can now become a member of my channel. Becoming a member of my channel would really support me, and your support really means a lot to me. If this video was interesting and helpful to you, I would really appreciate a like and a subscription. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, clear skies, Felix.